The topic for today's webinar is CRISPR-Cas precision genome engineering by Dr. Raviraj Banekar. Dr. Raviraj Banekar is an expert in genome editing, genetic engineering, and synthetic biology. Dr. Raviraj obtained his PhD in biotechnology in 2016 at the University of Lleida in Spain. Sorry. He is the recipient of the Excellent Cum Laude Award from the Government of Spain, which is the highest civilian award for an outstanding PhD research. During his postdoc research time at Iowa State University in the USA and the University of Minnesota, also in the USA, he has developed genome editing and precise genome editing technologies to manipulate DNA in cells. Dr. Banekar has published several research papers, book chapters, and presented his research in many international conferences. In addition, he is also trained as a science writer and a science communicator from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories in the USA. He has a passion for public speaking, which helps him identify problems faced by communities and the technological innovation needed to overcome these problems. I now request Dr. Banekar to start his presentation. If you could please share your screen with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica and Shubrata for a nice introduction, as well as the opportunity to present in this webinar. So as introduced, I'm Raviraj Banekar. So now the head of genome editing at Avasthgen Limited. So we are based in Bangalore, in the capital of the IT revolution and biotechnology revolution of India. So what I'm going to talk today is basically there will be two parts, so which are like the parts that are connected very well. So one is random genome engineering, and the second part is precise genome engineering. So why these ones are connected is it's a scientific history, because the way we used to do engineering, genome engineering in the past used to be random, but now we are in the middle of this revolution called CRISPR genome editing, or let's say genome editing per se. It allows us to engineer genomes in a more precise way. So I will take you through how we started off, then how we are going to moving ahead with these technologies, particularly the genome editing technologies. So if we look at this world, right? So we have this map. So what does this map basically say? Is that we have these red patches, we have these orange patches, and the green patches. So what does it mean is that we have so many people who are suffering from lack of food or lack of quality food on many places on earth, which is highlighted in red. Then we have fairly affluent societies where food is available at will. That's highlighted in the green. So if you look at this whole map, you will see that maybe at more than 50% of the world population is not equipped with enough amount of food and quality or safe food. But I look at this from an angle, right? So we are talking about food security now, but I look at this from an angle of technologies. So if you look at over the years, what makes us to have enough amount of food or quality or safe food is the technologies, right? So that's why I put a star and say technologies, because these are the technologies which I call them as enabling technologies, which allow us to achieve food security so that we can have a fair amount of food and quality and safe food for everyone on earth, right? So let me take through two of the important technologies in plant science, which are called DNA delivery technologies. So one is agrobacterium, then another one is biolistics, right? So agrobacterium, what it does is to introduce DNA from agrobacterium to the plant cell, where the DNA is integrated in the genome, right? Then we have biolistics, which is basically a gun or a machine that utilizes force to deliver DNA coated gold particles into the cell. Then the DNA is integrated into the genome, right? So what happens basically is that when the agrobacterium, for example, which is represented here in the left side, when it delivers the DNA identifies random DNA breaks in the genome. That happens because of many reasons, and the DNA is integrated the inside the genome, right? So this basically leads, many times, like a chunk of DNA in the genome getting deleted, or chunk of DNA, um, getting integrated somewhere else in the genome. Then we have another side, we have the biolistics, which also kind of go through the same process, but you get like incredibly complex number of integration events that are happening within the genome. For example, as you see here in the bottom side of the picture, so you will see that there is a fragment of foreign DNA here integrated. Then you have copies of DNA integrated next to it. Then you have copies of DNA integrated right next to it. So you get this complex arrangement. But what is agreed upon or experimentally shown is that these copies tend to have a single locus, so they will be inherited to the next generation as a single unit. So, I mean, what we know from these technologies is that they exploit random DNA breaks that happen in the genome, and we get to introduce our foreign DNA right in those random DNA breaks. But I mean, it's still a powerful tool, right? Can we use that powerful tool to make or create plants that will help people on Earth? So if you look at one of the problem that's prevailing on Earth is the iron and zinc deficiency. So there are like more than half of the world population suffer from iron and zinc deficiency. That's basically because people doesn't get enough amount of these nutrients through the diet. And if you look at the iron and zinc deficiency on Earth and look at the places where it happens, it happens like mainly in rice consuming countries, because like rice is incredibly low with these nutrients. So one of the technical questions that we asked is like, can we engineer rice using these random DNA breaks uh, technologies uh, to uh, create crops that will help us to have these in higher level of iron and zinc. So the amount that we set in was like, we wanted to have 14 microgram of iron and 28 microgram of zinc, so that if we have a rice that contains this much amount, we will have people getting enough amount of iron and zinc within 200 grams of rice, right? So the first approach that we took was to clone a gene from barley, then introduce that gene into rice, so that this is a gene that helps to transport iron. So it's a very iron specific uh, gene that codes for an iron specific transporter. So this, what happens is this led to an increase in iron uptake, translocation, then accumulation in the endosperm. But what we end up having was like, we got up until like 8 or 9 microgram of iron, but we are still lagging behind with our original target, that is 14 microgram for iron and 28 microgram for zinc. So then we are, since this is a specific promoter, we don't get to increase zinc with this approach. So we then took up a different approach. So what we did was to identify this pathway called phytosidra-4 synthesis pathway. So this is an extended pathway from L-methionine, which is an important nutritional amino acid, which basically leads to the production of S-adenosylmethionine. Then we have nicotinamide, which is NNA. Then we have deoxymugenic acid, which is DMA. So what NA and DMA does is they bind to the metals, right? So what happens is like if we can create a plant that accumulate higher amount of Na and DMA, so we will have um, these molecules that carry iron and zinc through the plant and accumulate it in the endosperm. So instead of like a transporter approach where we just put metals into the plant, here what we are doing is like we are having an engine, which is Na and DMA, which will pull the metals to the seed, right? So with this approach, what we did was like we expressed two genes, nicotinamide synthase from rice and nicotinamide aminotransferase from barley. So the idea was to like create a super Na and DMA accumulating plant that will also have super high accumulation of iron and zinc. So what we end up having with this approach was that we had a rice line that accumulated 23 microgram of iron and 84 microgram of zinc. So then we got a bit greedy. Then we created new set of lines that express these combination, the same combination of gene. But what we end up uh, doing was that we don't cross this upper limit of 23 microgram iron and 84 microgram of zinc. But in addition, what we found was that here you see the yellow, the blue graph. What we found was that we had 50% reduction in cadmium, which is a toxic metal, right? So this is cool now because we get to increase the important metals which are important for human nutrition, but we also tend to reduce the toxic metals, right? Then we conducted how much of this iron is bioavailable, and we came to we did this by particularly using a system called human Kapoor cell assay. So which in which case you use ferritin and transferrin as proxies to measure iron, the bioavailable iron content. So what we end up finding out was that the transgenic lines that we developed were like accumulating very high level of bioavailable iron. So which is kind of cool. So we also did several experiment where we show that the rice that we have developed is multi-trait. So it contains high level of iron, zinc, more bioavailable iron, then it is low with the toxicants. Then what's important here is also that if you have to like eat wild type rice and get enough amount of iron, you might have to eat like 2 kilograms of rice a day. But if we take the rice that we developed, it's a single bowl of rice, around 200 gram of rice per day will give you enough amount of the nutrients that are like needed. So then in addition, what like other people have shown with this pathway is that the plants that contain higher amount of nicotinamide and deoxynic acid tend to grow better and yield better in problematic soils like alkaline soils, sort of. So this is like we are like accumulating multiple traits within one strategy to create a crop that is multi-trait, right? But all that we did, if you look at like the DNA or the genome as a universe, so we were sending in the genes in the genome, and they were landing up anywhere and everywhere. But still, like we tend to select for like plants that are plants that have genes that landed in good places in the genome, so that like any random integration that is like toxic would be like eliminated by cell death. But we still like recover plants that are like landed in good place, but we don't have like control. For example, okay, I want to land my genes in X place or A place or a B place in the genome. The technology that we adopted didn't have that capacity. But over the years, we had a parallel line of research that was going on in the world that is called genome editing, right? So this is basically is like, if you look at the figure in the right, so you basically what I want to do is like, for example, okay, I want to edit the genome in a particular place, or like, for example, I want to introduce my foreign DNA in a particular place, right? So that can only happen if we can use genome editing tools. So genome editing has evolved um, over the years. So these are like nucleases that cleave the DNA in vivo and in vitro, so that we can open up the DNA, and like we can open up DNA in a place where we want to like open it up, right? So this genome editing has evolved over the years. So right from meganucleases, zinc finger nucleases, TALENs, and now the CRISPR. The one of the cool thing about CRISPR compared to like other genome editing approaches is that it's very easy to build um, the tool to edit the genome, and it's also like you can scale it up and you can conduct high throughput experiments. But if you want to do the same with any other genome editing approaches, for example, TALEN or zinc finger nuclease or meganuclease, it will take incredible amount of time. For example, to edit 100 genes or 200 genes, you can design an experiment in a week with CRISPR-Cas. Whereas if you want to like edit 100 genes with the TALENs, you need like 1 year of cloning or 2 years of cloning going on with this approach. I mean, zinc finger nuclease will take you much more longer time, right? So one is the advantage that CRISPR-Cas brings is the speed at which you can conduct the high throughput experiments. So how did we arrive at this point? So I think this is like one of the least highlighted aspect of genome editing field is that this was discovered by Francisco Mojica at University of Alicante in Spain. So what Francisco Mojica found out was that, so he was basically a bacteriologist looking at like the bacterial genome. So one fine day, what he discovered was that, you know, the bacterial genome has this particular sequences which are like repeat sequences. Then he was like wondering what are these sequences, right? So at that time, you know, he left Spain and went to England for 2 years to work on something else. So he came back to Spain. For 1.5 years, he didn't had like resources, money, and personnel to conduct research. So what he did was to like go back to his original data and dig out for what are these sequences, right? So he found out that, okay, these sequences are not the bacterial sequences. These are coming from the virus. So particularly the bacteriophages. So that's why, you know, that's when, you know, he gave the term CRISPR. So he was the first one to coin the term CRISPR. So, and then, you know, like later on, a lot of research went on to find out like why this system exists. So then this research led us to understand that, okay, this is particularly a bacterial immune system. So basically what it does is like when the bacteriophage invades the bacteria cleaves and copies a piece of DNA from the bacteriophage, then insert it into the genome so that it can use that information as a memory. When the virus come back, it can go and cleave this DNA. That is basically bacteriophage DNA. So it's interesting. If you look at like, so if you look at like how many components are here, so you have a spacer sequence, then you have a tracer RNA, then you have an enzyme. So this is for like one of the enzyme called Cas9. Then if you look at other enzymes in the pipeline called Cas12a, so you only need a spacer sequence that will cleave the DNA, right? So spacer sequence along with an enzyme. So this is like, then, you know, basically we end up having 3 components here. If you look at Cas9 system, so which is a tracer RNA that can bind to the DNA. Then you have a nuclease, tracer RNA and CRISPR RNA. Then you have a nuclease, and that cleaves the DNA, right? So this is like becoming more like easy now to open up the DNA, right? So, but what's important is that it's not just cleaving the DNA, but what happens to the broken DNA once the DNA is once the DNA has to survive, as well as like for the cell to survive, the DNA has to like repair and come to its original status, right? So that happens by two approaches. One we call non-homologous end joining, then another we call homology-directed repair. So, for example, if you take this sequence here, which is a 21 nucleotide sequence from rice, then you have this AGG, which is a protospacer adjacent motif. Then CRISPR will cleave 3 base pair from the protospacer adjacent motif. Then what if the repair happens through non-homologous end joining? What happens is that you will have these sequences like loss of sequences, some random event that is happening. So what you can do with this type of a repair is that you can knock out genes and create traits. On the other hand, when we have the repair that is going through homology directed repair, what we can do is, for example, I have highlighted here in the red, for example, 3 letters, right? So we can introduce that 3 letters right next to the protospacer adjacent motif. So which is, so means, for example, you can do amino acid substitution, you can change the configuration of a protein, or you can do, like, for example, if you have an inactive enzyme, you can make it active by creating such changes. Then also, for example, if you want to go and if you take this, for example, sequence as a promoter, then you can go and edit a promoter and insert information so that, you know, you can change the destination of the protein. For example, you can make a chloroplast targeted protein into like a mitochondrial or any other things, right? So that's the power of homology directed repair. On the other hand, you know, non-homologous end joining is like, okay, it does its job like cleaving the DNA and repairing it, but you cannot control the outcomes of this non-homologous end joining. And also, like, you cannot like precisely incorporate information that you want to incorporate, right? So I think, like, given that background, what we wanted to do was like first to evaluate how different enzymes in the CRISPR platform perform for genome editing. So we compared 2 enzymes, Cas9 and Cas12a. So Cas9 has 3 component system. As I said, it's an enzyme, then you have a tracer RNA, then you have a CRISPR RNA. Whereas Cas12a, which is formerly called CPF1, it has 2 components, an enzyme and a CRISPR RNA. So basically what happens is like this reduces the size of the whole cargo compared to Cas9. So the size of Cas12a is like 140 kilodalton. Then size of Cas9 is like 169 kilodalton. So I mean, these numbers are important if you like consider the delivery approaches. Then you have the tracer RNA, CRISPR RNA molecule, which is like which comes around 100 nucleotides, whereas Cas12a CRISPR RNA is like 40 nucleotides. Again, you have the lesser size. Then Cas9 is like, it recognizes NGGPAM, so which is very good if you want to like edit the coding sequences. Then you have Cas12a, which has triple T V, so V can be A, T, G, C, anything. So that is like quite helpful if you want to edit a promoter region, right? So then we wanted to compare how these enzymes are like compared for their editing efficiency. So what we did was to edit a gene in rice called PDS1. What we found was that